put the pointer over here. There we go. I've been collecting telegraph keys since 1980. My first one was a Vibraplex Model X. I picked up from an ad at the old ham radio supply, or not, it was amateur radio supply down in Georgetown. Saw an ad, answered it, didn't know what it was. Turned out to be quite a rare bug. Paid $15 for it and spent an entire day merely cleaning it. I'll show you a picture of one of them later. It's got so many moving parts, you can't believe it. At one time, I had over 1,500 items, professional size showcases, the whole shot. And I started very quietly cutting back about 10 years ago, and I'm now down to about 450 items. So I'm in rehab. My mom used to say she knew a guy that liked hotcakes so much that he had a whole closet full of them. So over the years, I built a database with over 5,000 key ads going back 150 years. Railroad Telegrapher magazines, all of the amateur radio magazines, anything that I could find. Sears Roebuck catalogs, Montgomery Ward's catalogs, Popular Science, anything that mentioned Telegraph and had articles or ads. So this enables me to do a pretty good job of dating keys when they were kind enough to move around a little bit, address changes, one thing and another, and especially if they had a key where they'd show it as new. I used to publish N7CFO key letter, which went out when I felt like it, about key collecting. As soon as I published 10 or 20 pages, we would go. But the internet just ate it raw. Unfortunately, the internet doesn't keep a record, email groups. So I'm getting some audio feedback from something. Oh, it quit. So first off, a test. Most of these keys were actually made, some were not. Can you tell which ones are which? The Mon key, the Tur key, the Mag key, the Cootie key, the Cricket key, the Glow key, the Can key, the L key, the Trans key, the Mac key, the Robot key, the Moto key, the Stream key, the Practo key, the Core key, the Pro key, the Quick key, the Moss key, the Squee key, the Dow key, the Pookie, the Nike, the Teeny key, the Twin key, the Dinger, the Wizards, the Smatic, the Little Monster, or the Valiant. These guys that built these keys obviously were Linux wonks, by the way they named stuff. The fact of the matter is every one of them was a key. I'll show you quite a bunch of them. So keys 101. This is a straight key, and it's nothing but a switch. There's contacts right there, a spring. This goes up and down. This connects to your radio or to your wired telegraph setup, and you send Morse code with it. This is a bug. Now this was the answer to an early form of tennis elbow called telegrapher's paralysis, where at the top of their game, after years of sending Morse code, there'd be tendon damage and telegraphers were out of luck. So they decided that this would be more ergonomic, and there were a whole bunch of trials to come up with something that worked. And the first one that really did and was practical was the Vibraplex. This is a very early Vibraplex. So what you've got is right here a set of contacts, and if you swing the lever, the paddles, to the left, you manually form your dashes. You swing it to the right, smacks the arm, smacks a stop right there, and this spring-loaded contact, there's the spring, slaps this other contact. So if you hear a bug in the air, you're going to hear kind of long, drawn-out dashes and very fluttery dots. Next up is a sounder. This is railroad stuff. This clatters up and down. And I attempted to learn the American Morse, and I gave up. It was driving me absolutely nuts. I can understand some of it, never quite understand how I understood it, and it was just destroying my ability to copy CW, so I gave it up. Okay, these are paddles. This Vibraplex, to make code, send CW, you hook it up to a keyer. Most new radios have got built-in keyers. And if you swing to the left, closes this contact, and it sends a long string of DAWs. Swing to the right, and it closes that contact and get DITs. So DAW, DIT, DAW, DIT. This is an iambic set. And notice there are two paddles, two sets of contacts. But you can close both sets of contacts simultaneously and send da-da, 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 da-da. Iambic, you remember in your 7th grade poetry class, iambic pentameter? Da-da, da-da, da-da. Now what's neat about iambic is you can, it's got a buffer built in, you can hold down the right side, the DAWs, and tap the left, and like you can, and then let go, and it'll insert that DIT between the two DAWs. So it'll be da da da. Quite a number of characters you can send, and some people have trouble learning it, and I just loved it from the start because it sends very clean Morse. It really does. This is a keyer, one of the early ones. Plug your paddles into it, and then this hooks into your straight key connection on the radio, and away you go. So the origins. This is what they've got in the Smithsonian Institute. If you look here, here is your Morse code down on the bottom, and it drags this stylus across it when you turn the crank. This is weight driven here, and you've got a paper with a stylus, and it'll put dots and dashes on the receiving end. Next evolution was what's called a pin register. They had weight driven models and wind up models. They had a paper tape, and it would print dots and dashes on the paper. So you'd strip out the paper and read the dots and dashes. It wasn't long before telegraphers were able to copy this stuff in their head, and they gave up on these except for fire stations and stuff, for fire alarms, and went to the sounders. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of them. Now this was the original Vail correspondent telegraph key. Not exactly complex. And here is the Vail lever correspondent by Alfred Vail. Then we get into weird stuff. Here is a needle telegraph that you swing that lever back and forth, and it swaps that needle, and the guy on the other end is supposed to read it and figure out what's going on. A dial telegraph from France, to where you swing that arm around the wheel to the appropriate letters, and I'm not sure what you do with it from there. Either push a button or turn or push the crank or something. They didn't last long. Here's a good one. Again, France, and I have never been able to get information as to exactly how that thing worked. I saw one of these when I was in Germany a bunch of years ago in a museum. So landline stuff, telegraph keys. Very early from the George Bliss Company in Chicago. Pretty crude, but nicely made, just a straight arm. There's the contacts, and the connections were made through the legs. It's what's known as a leg key. Two purposes to that. One, to tie it down so somebody doesn't steal it. And two, that's how you connect it into the wires. Tillot's in New York. This is what's called a camelback key for obvious reasons. Now, I want you to note the complexity of these keys. We'll get to that in a minute. These things are just gorgeous and worth a pile of money these days. Here's a Tillotson step key, so-called because of the step in the arm. Again, very complex, huge amount of machine work. Very, very pretty. And to me, this is the ultimate. I've got one of these in my collection. It's one of two known to exist. The other one sold on eBay about this time last year and went for $1,000. So there you go. Now, what's interesting about it, it's an absolute machinist's nightmare, but you've got two arms. And this arm here comes up to meet the other arm when you push down on the lever for absolutely no apparent reason. But, and you take a look at it and get it under good light, all the pivots and stuff, everything, it's just beautifully machined. But there's only two of them known to exist these days, so it wasn't a very big seller. And that's the irony of telegraph keys. The ones that were junk are now extremely rare, and I'll show you some more of those.
What year was that? What year was that Jenkins key from?
Oh, it was early 1870s, if I recall correctly. Here's a Lewis key, and again, look at the quality of the casting, the arms, all the rest of it. These show up all the time on eBay. There were quite a lot of them. They're a very, very nice key. Which brings us to the steel lever straight key. Jesse Bunnell, who claims, and I've never been able to really nail this down, to have been Abraham Lincoln's personal telegrapher during the Civil War, patented this in 1882, and it just blew everything else out of the water. It's very easy to operate, it's very smooth, it's very clean, trustworthy, and very easy to make. The whole arm is just stamped and goes through a jig to bend it. The base is cast, the hardware is stock stuff, and they just last forever. There's nothing to stop them from going.
Now, this looks like the needle pivot, which we know in the J38. Is this one of the first usage, or did the earlier ones have that?
I think it was about the first. There could have been others. I'll show you some other strange ones, but I was about to say that that is the predecessor of the J38, and they're still making this same basic key. Okay, now here is a Patrick, and it's not a typo, not Patrick, and Carter so-called lineman set. I personally don't think that any lineman carried a velvet lined box around with a portable set in it. As best I've been able to determine, by the way, that is a pure ivory handle, the knob on it. Back in the good old days, the wealthy had personal telegraphers, and luxury suites and luxury hotels had dedicated telegraph lines. And they would bring their own equipment. And this is a combination key and sounder. So I think that's what this one was used for. It is out of the case. I've got a slide I was going to oh, no, I'm sorry. I made some modifications in the presentation. Here's another form of a sounder. Note the really nice binding post. This characterizes the early ones, this type of binding post rather than the old cheap knobby ones. This one's unusual because it's vertical. New England Clock Company, a combination set. These are very, very scarce. A lot of clock companies went into that sort of business. A mechanical practice set. It's a combination key and non-electric sounder. You just make it clatter up and down by pressing the key. And this thing is just miserable to attempt to use, so they came out with this version, which has got some leverage to it, at least the key's in a proper place. These guys are also scarce. Here is the J.H. Bennell Cootie key or side swiper. These were made clear up into the 1940s. They started in the late 1890s. Got a set of contacts on each side, and you just figure out how you want a key. You can make it dashes on the left or right and dots on the opposite, or just kind of go with the flow and see what happens. Tillotson Victor key. This to me is one of the prettier keys. Note the contact or the pivots. It's like clenching your fingers together on opposite hands. Here is a box relay set up to give a resonant sound. They use these and also sounder hoods in big telegraph shops to direct the sound and also to give a distinctive sound to the equipment that you were listening on. Here, and I have no idea why they call it a snare drum relay, but is another version of that. This is a full practice set. Call boxes. Back in the good old days, businesses had a call box, and if they wanted to send a telegram, they would turn the knob on the call box, and a clockwork mechanism would send a Morse code message to the local Western Union office, and they would send a messenger to pick it up. This is a whole subgenre of collecting. Now, the one on the left, if you look close, there's a lot of brown paint under that, just like on the right. This one says Federal Telegraph. I've got two of them, and I've never had the guts to try stripping the blue paint off of them. Just afraid of what would happen. And I do not restore keys. There are people that get a new key and they go absolutely boogie and start polishing everything up, repainting one thing and another. I will dust them off. I will wash them very carefully. I will clean the contacts using just a piece of paper clamped between the contacts by closing them. But other than that, I just don't like messing with them. And I've seen a lot of keys that are just utterly destroyed. And I'll show you a great example in a few minutes by zealous cleaning. Now, here's one of my favorites, spark keys. I've been out to this station, what's left of it. There's a lot of concrete poking out of the ground, and it's right up on a bluff out on Cape Cod. That's what their antenna farm looked like. And this is what they crossed the Atlantic on back in Marconi days. And I've often wondered if Marconi would have given up if propagation had been just a little bit different at the time. But it was a pure brute force operation. Now, here is a 30 kilowatt arc transmitter. Yeah. Can you imagine what would happen if a stray cat walked into that shop? It'd be like a bug zapper. So, spark keys keyed the primary. Hence, big contacts and replaceable contacts. The telegraphers were darn near part of the circuit. I've been told that they had wooden chairs with glass insulators screwed onto the legs that they sat on, and then a wooden foot bar in the desk they put their feet on when they were transmitting. Now, this particular key was made by United Wireless in Seattle, and they bought it from the son of the guy who had it and operated it. As a kid in West Seattle, he claimed, his son said that his dad told him that he had a station that put out more power than the Navy station up at, on Lake Union. What's the name of that up there? not Lake Union, Lake Washington, Sandpoint. This thing is massive if you take a look at the scale on the ruler there. Now here is another one. Those contacts are 1/2 inch. And I got this thing at Mike and Key 25 or 30 years ago, and I've never been able to identify it. Unfortunately, a previous owner stripped it and chrome plated it, which that just breaks my heart. Note the contacts, and you can just unscrew it from the other side and put a new contact in. Now these guys are neat. This is a Marconi SE86 built for a explosion possible environment. Call that dirigibles or submarines. The contacts are all enclosed. And there's a whole family of these things. Flame-proof hand key, 1/2 kilowatt. That's what she would handle. Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company of America. There's this one. Take a look at these other guys. They all just look pretty much the same. Federal Telegraph, Wireless Specialty Apparatus, and Marconi. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this guy here, but take a look at the similarity. People call this a stirrup key, but it's pretty much the same design. It's obviously the grandchild of these other guys. This was made by Benell, and if you look close, it says CJB 2600A. CJB was the 3-letter code, vendor code for the J.H. Benell Company. You'll also see them CMI, which is Molded Insulation Company, and TEL, which is Telephonics. Now, CTE is Telephonics. There's a leg key from the Boston Navy Yard. And behind it is a chunk of telegraph cable that was used between Miami and Havana. A fellow collector, a scuba diver, figured out where the buildings were on the Miami end of it and went scuba diving and found the blithering cable and cut off a big chunk of it. Sent it to him. Well, sent me a piece of it. Sent a PVC sleeve there to hold it together. Does anybody care to speculate what the brown stuff is around the cable? By the way, it is coaxial cable. Some of you have it in your head right now.
Huh?
Gutta percha.
Pine tar?
No, it's what they use when they give you a root canal. They seal it up with it after they drill out the root canal. I've got at least 3 root canals, 3 of them. Last one, I took that in and showed it to the dentist, and he was absolutely blown away. It's been around forever. Macintosh Electric. Again, contact size is the answer on this one. Here is a spark gap and a Marconi spark key called the Roadmap. And whoever comes up with these names, I don't know, but that's what it's commonly known as among collectors. Here is the famed Boston key. If you had a Boston key back in the spark days, you were one well-heeled individual. They cost several dollars back then. Very, very nice key. And again, renewable contacts the whole shot. Marconi, model 205. Spring here. Another spring there, and this is the pivot. The William Duck Overland key. These are very rare. They made 3 models, a 10, a 20, and a 30 amp. And it's just absolutely pretty. I scored this one down at Ham Fair, the Rick Riall Ham Fair down near Salem. And then homebrew. The contacts are 5/8 inch on that monster. Yeah. Which brings us to the Kilburn-Clark WFA key. Now, long story I'm going to give you on this one. When I was making up that database, I went through every single issue of QST looking for ads, right? And I saw this article. I'm an old Alaska boy. An Arctic Adventure by Howard F. Mason. And Howard Mason was the radio operator on the Detroit News Wilkins Arctic expedition. And he describes it in great detail here, right? So I'm reading through a 1939 issue of QST, and they've got an article about a new keying device made by Howard F. Mason of Seattle, Washington. Doggone, I wonder if he's still alive. Well, I reached back, pulled out the phone book, and here it is, Howard F. Mason, Seattle, Washington. So, called, elderly woman answered. I identified myself, and I said, may I speak to Mr. Mason, please? And she says, well, Howard's taking a nap. I said, well, maybe you could help me. Is that the same Howard Mason that made a telegraph key back in 1939? And she kind of chuckled, and she says, you know, Howard never did much with that. Next day, I visit Howard. He's in his 90s, and he has one of those keying devices, and I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. We're talking, and he's just delighted to have company. He says, you know, that's the way he talked. He was deaf. He says, I've got a key you ought to see. And he came back with Kilburn-Clark made in Seattle key. And I just, oh man, I mean, super rare. And he says, I used that key in Little America with Admiral Byrd. He was the second to the last to die of the original Byrd expedition. And I knew him. So there's his article. And this is a letter from Malcolm Hansen to Commander Byrd saying, you need a radio operator. I'm recommending Howard Mason, Seattle Radio Laboratory, Seattle, Washington. And Howard was hired because of experience on the Wilkins expedition. Now back to Wilkins, Howard told me the Wilkins was an intrepid aeronaut. They had a 2-hole Fokker biplane, and they flew to Barrow in it, and he set up his radio gear there. And he said that Wilkins was too stupid to learn the codes, so he built him a transmitter with code wheels in it, and he could turn a wheel to send code. And it was like, and then he could put a different wheel on to send different letters. So it was like AAA means outbound, and BBB meant inbound, and CCC meant big trouble. So Wilkins heads out over the ice pack, and Howard's listening, and he hears AAA and then AAA, and after a while he gets BBB, and then he gets CCC, and that was it. And about 10 days later, Wilkins come wandering off the ice pack. He'd stacked up his Fokker biplane, but survived. And he made it back. That's the rest of the letter. And that's by Malcolm Hansen, Naval Research Laboratory, Anacostia, DC. So I got really interested in Little America, and I went down to Shorey's bookstore and bought a first edition copy of the book Little America by Commodore Byrd. And a month or so later, I went in there, and the clerk recognized me. And he said, hey, you're the guy about was asking me about Byrd, right? And I said, yeah. He said, I got something. I saved it for you. I was hoping you would come in. And he hands me a high school geography book that some kid had turned into a scrapbook, and he cut out articles about the Byrd expedition. I opened the book, and so help me, that's the page it opened up to. There was Howard. Howard F. Mason, Seattle radio engineer with Bird Antarctic Expedition, who is doing bulk of radio construction work in Great Adventure. He built the trail sets, the ones that were used by the dog teams and stuff while they were out wandering around Antarctica. There he is, operating WFA in Little America. And if you look real close, there's a bug right there. So I got him to autograph my first edition, Howard F. Mason, December 26, 1984, WFA. And I visited him several times, and the last time he looked pretty bad. And I could tell his wife was kind of giving me signals, and she had called me and asked me to visit. And he carried this out and he gave it to me. And I'll tell you, I just about broke down because I knew it meant so much to him, and he felt it was going to a good place. Well, the problem of it is it's going to a good place, but the good place is now 72 years old, and my family has no interest in this sort of stuff. So I donated it to the ARRL 2 years ago, and it is now on permanent display at W1AW. And I've got to get after them because they agreed that they were going to operate on straight key night. It's yet to happen. But I told them I want this thing to stay on the air. I used to operate it on straight key night every year, and I built a certificate for it. I had a good friend draw a sketch of it, and quite a good artist, and I would issue a numbered certificate to people that I worked on straight key night. So that's the history of the WFA key. So on to speed keys. Very old Vibraplex original. You can date them roughly by the plate. There's a variety of them. The early ones had the serial number on the damper, and this strap up here was obviously for carrying it, and I've not messed with it. This one has got a paper label on it. Here is a real hard to find one, the Norcross Vibraplex. When Horace Martin started making the Vibraplex, he did it in New York, and for some strange reason, moved to Norcross, Georgia, and was making them there. And they're super rare. And then he was making them out of Atlanta for a while, and those are impossible to find. There's very few of them. But we got any car collectors in the crowd? Because guess now, it says United Electric Manufacturing Company, Vibraplex, Horace G. Martin, Norcross, Georgia. United Electric Manufacturing Company made a gasoline automobile called the Norex, for crying out loud. Here's a Vibraplex double lever. To make your dashes, you swing this over and it closes the contact here you can't see, and you swing the other way to make and break contact with the swinging arm. Why? I don't know. A lot of complexity. Now this is my very first key. Is got a single contact and is so unbelievably complex because this whole mechanism flexes and pivots to close that contact when you swing to the left to make your dashes. And then it straightens out when you go to the right to make your dots. And I'll tell you what, taking one of these babies apart to clean it, and this thing was just covered in tobacco residue. You take these older keys, they had a slight electrical charge to them, and everybody in those days smoked. And I put it in the sink and squirted it down with a diluted 409 mixture, and it looked like chocolate syrup running off of that thing. And then I ended up photographing it from every possible angle so I could get it back together. Got the photos developed, and then very gently pulled it apart and wiped it down and cleaned it. These are super rare. So Vibraplex had 3 base sizes: the original, the Blue Racer size, and another size for the Junior, which is this one, or the Zephyr, which is nothing but a lightning bug on a smaller base. Here is the Vibraplex Upright, and this is the one that all of the non-collectors have heard about. I was in Dallas, Texas for a 2-week business trip and drove over to Fort Worth. And I've been looking for one of these things for 20 years. I can't tell you how many times I walked into a junk store and caught a glance of a kid's toy microscope and just about had a heart attack. So I was just hitting junk stores, antique shops, and I saw a small sign said antiques, and I stepped into this store, and they had all these leather goods, clothing, but then over in the corner I could see some old stuff, and I walked in and glanced down, and they had like a glass-topped coffee table, and this thing was sitting under the glass. I stopped, and I looked straight ahead, and I'm thinking, because you get really obsessed with this stuff, and you dream about it, and so on. It's like, did I see what I think I just saw? I looked down again, it's still there, and I'm awake. I'm in Fort Worth, Texas, and this is unreal. Guy came up and says, "May I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, what do you want for that old thing?" And he says, $350. Last one I've seen sold went for $4,500. And I, of course, said, "You take $250?" And he says, "Yeah." So I have no mercy to antique stores. Worst thing to me is when somebody comes to me with a silent key sale and says, "Lynn, make me a fair price," because you've got to do it or you're going to lose your reputation forever. There's the back side of it. That's the shorting bar up there to complete the circuit when it's not sending Morse. And this is one of those keys that was such a monster to operate that not many of them sold. I know of 26 to exist. I've got a census of them. Now here is the Vibraplex Midget, which was even worse. It was so skittish they had to put an outrigger on it. I visited a collector down in Arizona, and he had one and thought it was a fluke, that somebody had stuck a Vibraplex label on a piece of junk. And the label's on the underside of the bug. And about 2 years later, I was going through a 1918 Railroad Telegrapher magazine and found this ad. And I called him up and says, "John, you better be sitting down when I tell you what I'm going to tell you." And he just flat flipped. There's 4 of these known to exist. That's what the real thing looks like. That was John's. The Vibraplex Patent 457 showed up on eBay, and one guy in, I think he lives in Sweden, recognized it for what it was. It was a patent model. Everybody else thought it was a fluke, a mule, something somebody had pieced together out of junk parts, and he got it for a sol. And that's the only one known to exist. And the very rarest Vibraplex of all, though, next to that one. Vibraplex made a 2-meter radio, for crying out loud. Patent wars. We have here an A to Z Vibraplex. The improved Vibraplex made by A to Z, we call it ATOZ, Electric Novelty Company, Chicago. And the lawyers got rich over that before Vibraplex got them shut down. Here's another one. The Albright label. There were so many spin-offs of the Vibraplex patent. Machinists were building, they were selling them all over, that Albright, who then had the Vibraplex patents, started licensing people to have the bogus keys if they would pay a licensing fee. Note this says WUT down here, Western Union Telegraph Company. He would visit Western Union offices, and anybody caught with an illegal bug, it was pay up or we're coming after you sort of thing. These Albright labels are really scarce. Here is a Mechograph, a combination straight key bug, and an absolute piece of garbage. I picked this one up in Oregon. It's the only one I know of to exist, and it is just terrible. How anybody could send Morse code with it, I'll never understand. Now, Mechograph made a number of bugs that got around the Vibraplex patent by not creating tension by slapping a stop to set the pendulum swinging, but by releasing it by pulling this arm away from the weight. So Vibraplex solved that problem by buying them out. Here's another version, same thing. And another one. And this is original paint on this guy. It's not mine, I wish it was. They call it the Tiger Stripe finish. Here is the Dundaplex. Interesting thing in that you can use it as a bug, and it's missing the weights, or you can finger key with 2 fingers to send code. And that finger keying thing comes up all the time. People reinvent it about every 15 years. We have the Bent Dow by Paul Dow in Winnipeg, and I am the reigning world's expert on Dow keys. I located Paul's daughter, Lorraine, and interviewed her about 25 years ago, and she did a lot of the machine work and the plating work on their bugs in their basement in Winnipeg. They were chrome plating in their basement, for crying out loud. Now, this was meant to be ergonomic. The Dow Key Universal was patented and sold from 3 locations: Brewer, Maine, Winnipeg, and Warren, Minnesota. And the whole thing rotates. Here it is rotated. Again, for ergonomics. These were right after World War II up through about 1952. The McElroy, Theodore Roosevelt McElroy, the world's fastest radio telegrapher. The Mac key. The T-top served 2 purposes. 1, to carry it, and 2, you could flop it on its side and use it like straight key. And Ted McElroy was just a notorious individual. He had quite an alcohol problem, and he had a big ego problem. It says semi, AUMC, automatic, TGH, telegraph, and RDO, radio, code, XTR, transmitter, Mac key, 1934, manufactured, adjusted, and guaranteed by T.R. McElroy, world's fastest radio telegrapher, Boston, Massachusetts. He copied Morse, I think it was like 89 words per minute on a manual typewriter. That's a little hard to understand how he could do it, but he was really something. Here is the McElroy Jr. This is one of 3 known to exist, is part of my collection, and is an absolute piece of junk. It's just, parts are about the same as the good ones, but it's stamped out of sheet metal and folded out of sheet metal. But nobody liked them, so they're rare. He went on to form the Telegraph Apparatus Company in Chicago, and they were gone pretty much by the early 50s, but they made what's called the hole-in-the-wall bug, where the arm goes through the frame is a round hole. Here's a Teleplex bug. Teleplex was a Morse code training device. It was a paper tape trainer, and one of their models had this right-angle bug. This is the only complete one known to exist, and I have got a complete set of hardware, minus the base, for another one. And I picked up the hardware out of a dollar bin at Mike and Key. I was probably the only person in the world that would have recognized what in the heck it was. So I'm working with a collector right now that's all bothered and wants to get that from me. Here we have the Melihan Valiant. Melihan, Melvin E. Hansen. Any relation?
Relation.
2 arms, beautifully machined. There's so many adjustments and stuff you don't know what to do about it. These didn't last long, but they're very, very rare. Very nice bug. I haven't got one. The Lytle triplex. This can be operated to make it into a left-handed bug, a right-handed bug, or a straight key. They didn't last long either. Getting near the end of the rope here, foreign keys. A Levinson's like a flash for Australia. Looks pretty much like a Vibraplex lightning bug, doesn't it? McDonald Pendagraph from Australia. It had an arm that swung, it was vertical and went side to side for no apparent reason. The Buzza from Australia. The Rolf Brown Zoograph from Canada, basically a Vibraplex original copycat. And the Eddystone from England. Really a pretty bug, and they operate pretty nicely. The Vibromorse from France. And we get to electromechanical keyers. And this is the Moto key, the one that Howard Mason, the Antarctica guy, built. He built 3 of them. He sold one to a guy at the Naval Shipyard in Bremerton he was working with at the time. He scavenged number 2 to repair number 3. And this is the one that I ended up with. And I bought it for $10. And I told him, look, no, And he insisted. He says, look, I want you to have this, and $10 is the price. Take it or leave it, sort of things. Like, okay, Howard. It is very complex. And I'll tell you this, anytime you start mixing Morse code with anything near 110 volts, I get a little bit antsy. It's got an electric motor back here with a cone on it, and a spindle goes inside it with a rubber wheel, and that's how you adjust the speed, running this spindle up and down that cone. You've got 2 sets of cams here and another one here, and that thing is spinning like mad, and you use the paddles to release one cam or the other, and it sends dots or dashes. So I got stupid and decided I'm going to put this monster on the air, set it up to operate very slowly, and got on 70, 80 meters one night, raised a guy in Portland, and things were going great until all the ancient grease in this thing started loosening up, and it started going faster and faster and faster. And I lost control of it and unplugged it, and couldn't get another key on quick enough to talk to the guy. I ended up writing him a letter and explaining what happened. So that's the last one known to exist. Here we have the Mon key, early 1950s. Monitor keyer, Monkey. Anybody heard of the TO keyer, Jim Ricks? Interesting story about Jim Ricks. I checked in the call book, and this was 30 years ago, and the call was still active, so I wrote him a letter. This was before internet days. Got a courteous reply from his son, who was keeping his dad's call sign going, and he says, I see you live in Bellevue, Washington. Dad is living in a assisted care facility in Kenmore. Please call my sister if you would like to visit him. Well, good criminy. So I grabbed my TO keyer, talked to his sister, and went up and met her and her dad, and he was just over the moon. He saw that keyer, he just flipped. Well, he developed the original TO keyer, gave away schematics, and helped people build them, and Hallicrafters traded him a bunch of radio gear. It wasn't even patented, but for the rights to make the TO keyer. Now, Jim was a real character, and he was a Dayton hound and a real boozer, according to his kids. And he attempted to join the COFs, and I don't know what it stands for, but it's a European High-Speed Morse Club. And somehow or another decided that they had dissed him. He got very thoroughly annoyed at him, so he formed the CFOs. And people see my call sign. I've been asked many times if I'm a CFO. And the CFO stands for the Chicken Fat Operators, I kid you not. Google it, and if you dig deep enough, you will find a web page. And it was a invitational Morse code high-speed group, and they called them the CFOs because the only thing that was good enough to lubricate their keys was chicken fat. And they would sign off from QSOs with kind of a chicken clucking sound made with their bugs. He passed away several years ago, but I was fortunate I was able to take 3 other collectors up to meet the guy. W6OWP used to run the West Coast W1AW high-speed Morse transmissions. Forrest Bartlett, I used to see him at CPAC all the time. He first came out with this keyer as a do-it-yourself project and then went into production, and unfortunately wrote all of his production records on the wall of his shop in the basement and sold the house. But quite a nice little rig, and you see them turn up every now and then. There were a couple hundred of these made, and he told me where to find the serial number on it. It's inside. Things that go click in the night. The quick key. I tracked down the guy that made these. He said that he sold about 200 of them on one mass purchase to France, and he had no idea why, but they paid the money and called it good. And he sent me this as a gift because I was interested. The Kitano key is made by Kit Raymond. I don't think Kit's still making them. Kit was his first name. He played the piano. He put the words together, Kitano, and this is finger keying. He was selling them in Maine. He made several versions of them. Well, here's an RAF bathtub key. The little latch serves 2 purposes. One, to keep the innards, the latch down, or if you're about to ditch into the ocean, you could key down and put that over the skirt and just send a continuous wave until the ocean got it. Now I have here a genuine key that sends upward Morse and downward Morse. Does anybody care to speculate what upward Morse is and what downward Morse is? Okay.
No idea. Sorry.
These were used in British fighter planes. I'm told the Spitfire was one of them. They had a blinker light on the top of the fuselage and another one on the bottom, so that you could communicate with people that your wingman or a formation or whatever. And so if you put it into upward Morse position, the top light would light and you could send flash or Morse. Put it in downward position and same thing. Took a long time for me to get that. I finally found some people in Europe that explained what it was. Here's a J51. It's a US key for a light keyer, signal light on a tripod. VE3QQ, Al Jackson. VE3, I got a hold of Al. We corresponded. He sent me this key. This is the glow key. Built some beautiful keys out of discarded potted meat cans. This one you keyed by breaking a light beam. Right here. The electronic feather touch. You keyed by using your fingers to make contact between the little terminals in the grid. I never had the guts to fire it up. I don't like 110 volts. Here is a J.H. Bonnell secret sounder. huh? That's what's inside. Tiny telegraph sounder. These were built for situations where that you wanted to keep your Morse code traffic secret from other people. They were used like at ball games and stuff, to where the announcer had a lot of background noise. These guys are real rare. Every time I get near a ham fair, I start asking people if they mind if I screw the lid off of their headphones just to make sure it isn't a secret sounder. I've never found another one yet. And that's all. I do thank you. And anybody got any questions or whatever, give me a shout.